Welcome everyone to Disability Warriors. My name is Hannah Rashid. I am the host/creator of Disability Warriors. On this podcast, we look at new topics each episode, diving into the struggles disabled people face within those topics, and sharing helpful information and advice to support people with all types of disabilities. Welcome to Disability Warriors. I'm your host, Hannah Rashid, and today I'm joined by two incredible and amazing authors, Rosie Talbot, author of 16 Souls, and Chaz Hayden, author of The First Thing About You. Thank you both so much for being on the show today. So today we're discussing disability representation in books. And of course, you both have written these amazing YA novels with wonderful characters who have different types of disabilities. But before we get into all of that, why don't we talk a bit about what your books are about? So, Chaz, would you like to start us off?
Yeah, sure. And thanks, Hannah, so much for having me on. I'm the author of a YA novel called The First Thing About You. And it follows a 15-year-old boy named Harris who has a disability called spinal muscular atrophy. And that's the same disability that I have myself. And pretty much means we have weak muscles and we drive around in a really awesome powered wheelchair. But the story is about Harris and his family moving from California across the United States to a state called New Jersey. And he's going to take this as an opportunity to reinvent himself, to kind of be known as more than just the kid in a wheelchair. But he sort of has an obsession, I'd say, with knowing everybody's favorite color. He thinks that by knowing someone's favorite color, he knows everything about them, their personality, if he can have a relationship with them, how to communicate with them. And in his mind, it's a way for him to judge other people the way he assumes people judge his disability when they first see him in his wheelchair. So throughout the story, he'll make some new friends and he'll get a new nurse, Miranda, who's red and orange and sort of the complete opposite of Harris's blue. And she's outgoing and confident. She's going to kind of help Harris along this journey, but we're really not sure if she's helping Harris or if she's hurting him during his self identity.
So, yeah, that's really amazing. And it was awesome reading your book and learning about all of that. And Rosie, how about your book?
So, yeah, thank you so much for having me on the show. It's wonderful to be here. So, I'm the author of 16 Souls, which is a YA adventure sort of horror novel set in haunted York in the north of the UK. And it follows a boy called Charlie, who is a bilateral below the knee amputee. He's also gay and he sees the dead. And when the ghosts of York start to go missing, he teams up with the cute but, of course, irritating new Syrian town called Sam to save them from a fate worse than death and find out which dark forces are behind the disappearances. And it was a lot of fun to write.
So that's incredible. And we've got a bunch of questions lined up today, and we're going to run through them. But before we do that, I thought we could use the first question as a fun little icebreaker. So the first question is, what do you wish people would ask you, and what would you want someone to know about you? Chaz, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I love this question because it's something that I personally think about all the time for other people when I meet them. I'm always thinking like, what do you wish someone knew about you, or what do you wish people would think about you? For me, I guess I would go back to my writing itself, and I would say I wish people would see my novel and see what it's trying to do in terms of disability representation. I'm trying to, really authentically portray someone's life living with a disability and growing up with a disability and show that Harris, my main character, he wants what every other teenager wants to have friends and to be loved and to fit in and to understand who he is, regardless of his disability. And that being said, for me personally, I always say that I want people to see me more as a storyteller and I don't often consider myself a very literary or technical writer, and I don't really know if I want to be that, but I hope and I want to write stories that are authentic and relatable and compelling, and they feel like real life. They feel like real people that I'd want to meet and hang out with.
Awesome. So, yeah, and Rosie, how about you?
So, gosh, I mean, I thought about these questions for a long time, and I realized that I love asking other people questions. That's my so I think one of the questions I would want people to ask me something that they want me to ask them. I know that sounds silly, but I just yeah, I love finding out about other people. And I guess I suppose it's about like so I have a hidden disability, so I don't look sick. I usually look totally fine. And I'm often quite exhausted and really like struggling necessarily to kind of collect the spoons I need to get tasks done. Kind of sometimes want people to ask me if I'm okay and if I need to sit down, if I need to take a break, and things like that. But I also don't want them to ask me that, if that makes sense. I'm kind of very much in that space of not wanting to accept my own limitations. I'm still moving through that space. And I think actually writing 16 Souls has been a big journey for me, in processing my disability and what I can and can't do, even though Charlie does not share my disability at all. So yeah, I mean, I also want people to ask me about my pockets because I have really cool pockets. I have huge pockets and I can carry all sorts of things in them. I wear these big sort of Victorian style dresses with many, many layers and lots of ruffles. And I can fit an entire folding chair under one of them. It's great. And sort of perch places. And then I have these big pockets and I can fit water bottles and tissues. And but actually, I have one skirt I can fit 16 books in. It is not practical. I can't sit down or move comfortably, but if I had to in a pinch, I could fit 16 books in this skirt. So yeah, one thing I would like people to ask me about is my skirts and my pockets, which they do constantly because I definitely stand out and I look a bit strange. And what would I want someone to know about me? I suppose a bit like Chaz, that I don't, I mean, I am an author, but I see myself as a storyteller, and I do want to write books that are, I mean, I'm not looking to win any literary prizes. I'm looking to tell stories that people want to read again and again about characters they fall in love with and want to spend time with and feel seen and feel kind of part of this world and offer some escapism for them. And because I write a lot of fantasy. Yeah, sorry, that was really rambly.
Oh, it's fine. And I mean, the thing about the pockets, fitting 16 books into a pocket is a definite necessity for me. I would take a book everywhere I go. Just, I need
Yeah,
that.
I think there's a story idea behind the 16 books in the pocket. That's like that's a nice plot line right there.
I work at a bookshop, and people quite often ask me if I've escaped from a book. So, I mean, I think probably just because of the enormous skirts, really.
Well, I think that's the highest compliment anyone can get. I would love that if someone asked me that, or said that to me. But yeah, I personally wish people would ask me what my favorite book is and would know that I really love playing archery. So that's something I'm really into. So yeah. Um, Now that we sort of know a bit more about each other, let's get started in today's discussion about disability representation in books. So, I'm sure that when it comes to writing a character who has a disability, it can be a struggle to provide accurate representation. So, Rosie, in your case, as an author who doesn't share the same disabilities as her characters, who, however, has written amazing characters who do have different types of disabilities, what did the writing and research process look like when creating these characters?
So Charlie is a bilateral below the knee amputee, which I most certainly am not. And so I knew when I was approaching his character in the story that I wasn't going to be writing a book about what it is like to be a disabled teenage boy who is a bilateral below knee amputee, because that's not my authentic lived experience. And it took a lot of research and a lot of time to kind of craft not so much his character, but how he experiences and engages with the world and just his everyday reality, to make sure that his disability was well integrated into the novel, but wasn't overly dominant, but also wasn't forgotten. A lot of research for me, and a lot of awareness that I am not writing from an authentic place. And so I needed to keep that in mind. And I needed to make sure that I wasn't trying to tell a story that wasn't mine to tell. Charlie's disability, like his being queer, is just a part of his body, mind, and the way he experiences the world. It's just a part of his situation, and I had to take that into account while I was writing. But it's yes, a lot of research.
Okay, yeah. And Chaz, you've written this amazing main character who actually, like you said, shares the same disability as you. Would you say that the experiences that Harris faces in your book are similar to what you've experienced in your life, or are they actually quite different?
I think they're similar to not just me, but anybody who probably has a physical disability. Um, we see a, a ton of different obstacles that he has to overcome, including just trying to fit in, right? Accessibility, but then also dealing with teachers and the high school that he's at, and them trying to accommodate him, and him and his family expressing what Harris needs in order to be an independent and successful student, and sort of being denied that kind of accommodation. And I think, unfortunately, that is very often the story of a lot of my friends, me included, growing up within education. Um, I think the story itself is not very similar to my growing up, in the sense that I think the most similar is his family. I came from a family that was much like his, very supportive and loving. A mom who is slightly overbearing and smothering, but comes from the most well-intentioned and loving place, and just wants to see her son succeed. You know, like regardless of a disability, just wanting him to be a teenager and get out there and live life. And then also having a brother, um, who doesn't, who doesn't pity the younger brother with the disability, but seen as equal and friends and brothers, and just as the definition. So the most that's it's like a lot of people are like, oh, this had to happen, and it's really hard for my family, like my extended family, to read this and say, oh, that didn't happen. I'm like, no, that never happened to me. Um, but there are some scenes in there, little tiny humorous things that I had to include. Most of the stuff happened in a bathroom. That's a little bit of a hint, to anyone that reads it. Um, that those kind of things happen to me, just for fun. I think that most of the things that were similar were Harris's just feelings and his emotions, and what he's going through, and just trying to figure out adolescence.
Yeah, and I think especially when reading your book, I did relate to a lot of the sort of physical challenges that Harris faces, and something quite funny that you did write about the fact that he was in the crowded corridor and stuff, and just you want to run someone over when you're going
Yeah,
fast, you just want to get
exactly.
out of the way. So I face that every single day when I'm in crowded streets or anything with my electric wheelchair. So that's definitely
That's what I
something.
mean.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think I just took like everything I've ever been through and just sort of fictionalized it, sort of, to make it more universally relatable. Like I didn't want to write a biography because not very good at writing about myself, and I don't really think I'm that interesting. But I knew that I could take a story of someone that is disabled, but not have it be the central plot of the story, but it's there, and we understand his struggles, and anyone can relate to it. Someone that is also disabled can relate to it, but someone who is not disabled, whether they're a teenager or an adult, can say, "Oh, I feel that," or "I can empathize with that."
yeah, definitely. So yeah, um, I would say that for a lot of us, we first learn to read and write in school, and this also means that a lot of the books we've read would have been during our school years. So, would you say that there is more disability representation in YA books now compared to when you were in school? So, Rosie, would you like to start us off?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I was a big reader all through my life, and I've probably forgotten a few, but looking back, I can probably only name one book that I can remember reading as a teenager that had disability representation in. And I don't necessarily know if that book has aged well, and that disability representation was not, as far as I'm aware, authentic or own voices. And I don't know how well it was handled. Now reading the book again as an adult. So I think a lot has changed. I definitely still feel, though, that there really isn't enough disability rep in books out there. And I would love to see more. I would love to see so much more.
And Chaz?
So I sort of feel the same way. I mean, yeah, as a child, there were some books or novels that I think had some representation, but they were either not the main character, they were a side character, or they were probably, it wasn't really a physical disability. Maybe it was like they were sick or something in the hospital, which is still often very relatable for a lot of people. If, you know, but I think now there's obviously like I sort of agree with Rosie that there's not enough, but I also I'm also like there's too much. And what I mean is like I think that there's not enough authentic disability representation. I think we continue to see like stories being put out, and they're written by characters, I mean authors, sorry, that are not disabled, and it just sort of seems like they're slapping a label on a character for no reason. For no reason, it really doesn't affect the story if you read it. You're like, if they had the disability or not, the story doesn't change. So it just seems like they said the character was disabled just to say it was. I don't really, in my mind, that's not really inclusivity to me. I'd rather be not represented than represented inauthentically. So that's kind of how I feel about the current status.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that because a lot of the time, I think in the last 2 to 3 years is when I've actually seen decent and good representation being put out there in books, along with the books I've read of yours and a couple others as well. But before that, when I was reading, I would never really see any representation of any type of disability. So it is nice to see more. But of course, authenticity is the main thing when it comes to writing the sort of type of representation.
Yeah, I agree with Chaz. I think no rep is better than bad rep, like because it just perpetuates like myths and stereotypes that can be really harmful to the community. Um, so yeah, I agree. Like, there's no point in just peppering in disabled characters where, yeah, if they weren't disabled, nothing would change. The story and their characterization would be exactly the same. Like that doesn't really make sense, and that doesn't work.
Yeah, 100%. And that's something like Rosie, I'm sure you thought about when you were writing your novel, and something I thought about was like, if you take away the disability, does the story change? And the answer to that has to be yes. Like it just has to be. And I think that's, I think that's with any sort of marginalized community that's trying to share their stories authentically, sort of these own voices. If you take away that attribute of that character, does the story change? And the answer should be yes. And if it's not, then you're really not sharing, or you're really not sharing the voice of that community.
Of course, yeah. I agree with both your points, and it is definitely something that hopefully, as the years progress, is going to get better because I think a lot of sources of media are including more disabled characters and obviously adding them into the plot where it's more important. If you didn't have that character there, it wouldn't really be the full story that you need and that you have. So I really hope that improves as we progress and get more literature in the world where there are characters of disability in them. But keeping it on a sort of academic focus when it comes to school and everything, when I do a lot of research for coursework, I love looking at all the different academic books and all of that. So I found it really interesting when you put the focus of color psychology into your book, Chaz, which not only lets us know that this main character of yours has this really interesting interest, but also allows us to know more about color psychology itself. What inspired you to add color psychology into your book, and is it something that you're really interested in?
I knew nothing about color psychology or color theory prior to writing this, and it actually was not a part of the original story idea. I was about 50 pages or so, probably even more, into the original manuscript, and I just felt like something was missing, something to kind of tie together this idea of like judgment and feeling judged, and also just kind of first impressions of people, identity, your self identity. So around that time, I was having a conversation just coincidentally with a friend, and we were talking about how, well, they were talking about how if you're somewhere and you see people, a lot of people are wearing blue, or a lot of people are wearing red or something, and it's just has something to do with like the moon position. I don't know. It was very far fetched, but I started thinking about colors, and they were kind of telling me about color psychology, and I really knew nothing about it, but I went home and, you know, take out the moon part and the moon rotation. um, I was like, wow, this really is a sort of pseudoscience, I guess. But the more research I did into colors and kind of reading about them, like my favorite color is blue, just like Harris, and I read about what that means, and it fit my personality. And then I was reading about some of my friends and family's favorite colors, and it seemed to fit, and it just seemed like this really like sort of innocent and arbitrary way to like just label somebody the same way Harris feels he's being labeled just because of his wheelchair. And it's just so much fun to implement and kind of weave into the story. And there was a lot of fun to learn about.
Yeah, I think reading it was really fun. It was very interesting and just something different as well. So it was good to see all of that and learn more about what color psychology is. And yeah, I think we got a bit off topic there, but had to ask that question because it was just rolling around in my mind.
No, I think that's on topic for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I love the cover of your book, Chaz. I love how the color theories are brought into the cover as well. It's so
Yes.
striking.
So the cover has a lot of kind of little nuances to it. So yeah, it's obviously very colorful. But the idea is when you're at the eye doctor and you take the colorblind test, um, and so it's sort of that. But the point is that the dots on the cover make up the title. So the title is not font over the dots. So if you take out the dots, there'll be nothing on the cover. It'll just be blank, which I really like.
Yeah, and especially at the back as well, it sort of forms someone in a wheelchair, which was
Yes.
really
Uh-huh.
cool. So
Yep.
yeah, that's a very creative way to make your cover and obviously link it back to the main story at hand in the book. So
Mm-hmm.
that's awesome. Um, so yeah, the next question is sort of like for your future books, do you have any plans to include more characters with disabilities? And if so, will these characters have different disabilities from the ones you've written so far? So, Chaz, how about you?
Right now, I'm working on my second novel.
Mhm.
It's also YA. So something I wanted to do was I like the idea of taking a topic from my first book that I didn't really have a chance to expand on or really give much space to. So, in the first thing about you, Harris and his brother Ollie, we understand they love each other, they support each other, and we kind of see that play out towards the end of the novel. But it just didn't have enough opportunity and space and pages, to be honest, to really dive deep into what it's like to have this sibling relationship where one is disabled and the other isn't. And I really wanted to expand on that. I thought that was kind of an important topic to give an entire novel to that. Um, so the second novel is sort of about siblings, a older brother and a younger sister, and one of them is disabled and the other isn't, and kind of what is the end, and then take Harris's family, right, which is really supportive and loving, like I said, flip that on its head, the complete opposite, and stick two people in that family dynamic, right? And what do you kind of end up with? So that's kind of what the second story is about.
Sounds very similar to my life.
Yeah.
I mean, I do have an older brother, and of course, everyone in my family but me is not disabled, and then there's me. So I totally understand the sibling dynamic when it comes to, the siblings who don't have disabilities, and then you having it, and the sort of like the life you live all together, and all of that. Sometimes family members can be supportive, but there have been family members who aren't that supportive as well. So it's that I'm definitely picking up when it's published. And as for you, Rosie, how about you in terms of future plans for your books?
So I'm just finishing up a sequel to 16 Souls, which continues Charlie's journey, which I'm really enjoying. And then after that, who knows what I'm going to write? But I will always, I think, write fantasy and horror, and I would like to write more characters with disabilities in my book. But again, it has to be something that is integral to the narrative, integral to their character. And if it's not my own shared experience, I need the space and time to be able to write those characters well. I do want to write a character in my next series who shares my situation and my disability, but that's something I'm still processing and learning a lot about. So I think that will be a really interesting journey, and I am looking forward to telling that story. But it feels so intensely personal. It's going to be a bit of an emotional undertaking for me in a way that 16 Souls wasn't as much, although again it's still opened a lot of things for me to deal with when I was working on it. So yes, absolutely, I think it's important that I work towards that.
Yeah, that does sound really amazing for both of them, and I'm definitely, as like a big fan, I'm definitely looking forward to both of those books coming out and reading them. So that's going to be something to look forward to. And I will say that if you ever write a female character who's geeky and funny and in a wheelchair, I'm more than happy to provide some referencing and help in that research process, as a geeky, funny female character in a wheelchair myself. So get in touch with me if you ever need that.
Absolutely.
Thank you. And yeah, speaking of the sort of research process, Rosie, I know that you talked about what the writing and research process was like, writing a character who doesn't share the same disability as you. However, during the research process, did you ever get in contact with anyone who has the same disability as your characters in your books?
I did. I had a full sensitivity read done for 16 Souls, and was advised by somebody I know who is an athlete who shares Charlie's disability. And in fact, the reason for his disability as well, they both had childhood meningitis. We didn't know each other when I started writing the book, so 16 Souls is not at all based on him. But when he was reading, he was like, "Is this me? Is this?" I was like, "No, we didn't know each other when I had this idea and I wrote the draft." So his advice was absolutely invaluable. The feedback I got was so important, and it was able to bring. I don't want to use the word necessarily authenticity, because I don't feel like 16 Souls is an authentic voice, because it's not. But it helped me bring accuracy and sensitivity to that story and to Charlie's story. And I mean, one thing I learned was that every single amputee's experience is so varied, depending on their amputation, depending on their age, situation, and that was so interesting. And I'm still doing so much research while writing book 2, and I will again be seeking out sensitivity readers for not just the disability. Although again, I'm queer myself, I still have the book sensitivity read for queer representation, for everything I can think of, because I do think it's so important and so vital.
Yeah, I think that's quite amazing, and I've actually never really understood that before. The sensitivity reading, so that's something new I've learned today. So, thank you. I think so. Our final question for today is if you could give one tip to another author when it comes to writing a character with a disability, what would that tip be? Chaz, would you like to start?
Yeah, sure. Um, Something I always say is what what makes this what I've been told makes the first thing about you successful, and what was really intentional for me is I didn't want to write from the disability was not the central story or the plot. If disability was at the front of my mind when I wrote this, then I would have written from a place of anger and frustration over how inaccessible the world is. And Harris and myself included are not angry people. And I didn't want this to be an angry story. But I knew that if I just included the subtleties and the day to day challenges that Harris has to face, then people would be able to understand and empathize with his disability and with anybody's disability. And I think that's what I'd recommend to anyone who is disabled and trying to write about a disabled character is I know that there's a lot you want to say, but it's really hard sometimes to stand up on a soapbox, if you will, and just scream at the world and hope that someone listens to you. That's not always the case, especially with people who don't live your life and are trying to learn. But the best way to get them to empathize is to show them and have them feel along with the character and along with the story. And one of the best comments I got on a review and someone that messaged me was that they said the story taught them without lecturing them. And I think that was it just really touched me. So it was really intentional on my side. And I think it sums up what we need within the space of media is we need things that teach without lecturing. And in order for people to fully become aware and empathize with what we're trying to say.
And Rosie, how about you?
Yeah, that was such a good answer, Chaz. That was amazing. I'm going to address the question from like somebody who might be writing a disability that isn't their own, or who might not be disabled and wants to include disability in the novel, because I think that would be helpful. And I would say, do your research. Sensitivity readers are worth their weight in gold. Whatever you have to do, find the right people to help you create that world and those characters and that experience. But I would also say, no matter how hard you work and no matter what you do, please never assume that you're definitely right. Like, you are always learning. You are always, you're always in need of feedback and learning, and not everybody is going to agree exactly with the representation, perhaps, because again, everybody's experiences are so differently. So it's really important to keep listening and keep talking, and always work to try and write the best rep that you possibly can. And also, I would say, familiarize yourself with all of the possible negative tropes that could be involved in that representation, to make sure you're not perpetuating negative stereotypes within literature that could be harmful to a community. Yeah.
Okay, then. So that's it for today's episode. Thank you both so much again for being on the show. It was an honor meeting you both, and I really hope you both enjoyed it.
Thank you.
It was great. Thank you so much.
For more information and content, please subscribe and follow us on our social media. Link below in the description.